Welcome to the Left Wing podcast in association with Aldi. Spend €30 in store for a chance to win €50,000 for your primary school. More chances, more prizes, more reason to enter.
Taylor, O'Driscoll, Morgan, extra man is Fitzgerald. Oh, Fitzgerald is cutting back inside! Leinster have another! Darcy, O'Driscoll through the legs, Rob Carney, out to Fitzgerald again, step and score! Number 2 for him!
Hello and welcome to the Left Wing Independent.ie's rugby podcast in association with Aldi. I'm Will Slattery. I'm delighted to be joined in studio as always by Luke Fitzgerald and Fergus McFadden, as well as on the line by Ben Teo, who was involved in the England World Cup training camp under Eddie Jones. And Luke, England were huge favourites going into the game. I didn't really see anybody picking South Africa, but in the end they were fairly comprehensively dominated. You know, they conceded 15 points off scrum penalties. There was a lot of drop balls from the English. The South African defence was airtight. Another World Cup final goes by where they haven't conceded a try. You know, after all the talk about how good England were against the All Blacks, were you surprised just how thoroughly or comprehensively they were beaten in the end?
Yeah, I was. Look, I don't think anyone had South Africa tipped to win that one. I know before the tournament, you know, a lot of people thought that you know, their performances in the Rugby Championship maybe that they could have done it. You know, they beat New Zealand obviously and looked very strong. But I think throughout the tournament, England definitely looked like the strongest team. And obviously after a brilliant performance against New Zealand, everyone thought they were going to do it. So yeah, no, it would have been disappointing for them. And I think like it was interesting. There seemed to be like a fairly familiar team with lots of the teams that kind of, particularly in the last couple of games. I mean, Ireland against New Zealand against England. You know, if you defended well against teams, they didn't seem to react well. That seemed to be the real defining characteristic, I thought, of all the teams that did well. I thought South Africa defended brilliantly well, you know, and caused England to make a lot of kind of uncharacteristic mistakes. And yeah, they ended up winning comfortably enough, which is kind of weird, you know. Yeah,
Ferg, do you think, was Warren Gatland right in the end? Did England play their final in the semi-final against the All Blacks? Did he put so much of an emphasis on beating New Zealand that they didn't maybe have emotionally enough in the tank, or that they were just a bit complacent, maybe even? They thought it was over. They thought it was won.
No, I don't know what it was. It's easy to say that now after Warren Gatland said that comment.
Very easy.
Well, I mean, Eddie Jones had a smart comment about Gatland as well, so fair play to Gatland for coming back with something that actually stood in the end, and I'm sure that hurts pretty hard for him. But not just saying it because Benny's on the phone, but I mean, I think it showed in that final with how physical South Africa are, that maybe having the likes of Owen Farrell at 10 and the likes of a Benny at 12 and Tuolangi at 13, they wouldn't have been getting over the gain line as much. And you could see Steph du Toit was going after. There's lots of clips and lots of footage being cropped up all week of Steph du Toit going after Ford. And, you know, Ford's a great player, you know, and he did well during the tournament. But when people go after him, things can implode a bit at times for him, and that doesn't necessarily happen. Farrell usually very physical, 10 when the most physical in the world. So yeah, I'd say Benny was drinking the beers when he saw that result anyway.
Yeah, we'll bring in Ben on the phone. You're having a laugh to yourself there, Ben. What was the experience like for you watching that final, you know, having been involved in the squad up to very close before the tournament? Were you, I'd say, partly a bit pleased with the result?
No, I just think, look, I've got a lot of really close friends in that team. So, you know, for me, I was gutted for them because I've been in the camp for so long. And I think Eddie's been literally saying, we're going to win the World Cup. We're going to win the World Cup. I mean, he used to say that a couple of times a day. I'm talking about every day in camp for 4 years. So I know how much they wanted it. But, yeah, look, it was probably a tough game to come down from the New Zealand one. And they'll probably look at the week that they've had versus South Africa and maybe be kicking themselves a little bit that they didn't rise to the occasion. And I think, you know, all the chat of the parade being organised and how much players are going to make and bonuses and that. And, you know, these guys are only human. And I think if they read into it or not, and it's just, I think South Africa were hungrier. And you definitely saw that from the performance.
And Ben, as you mentioned, Eddie used to talk about the World Cup and winning it so regularly. Was there a similar focus on New Zealand specifically? Because in the media anyway, he did always talk about how the All Blacks were the team that England had to take down. So was that something that maybe all the eggs were in, the New Zealand basket, and then after that was done, maybe subconsciously the players thought they were over the line?
Yeah, look, I think, whether he would admit it or not, but from my view, I definitely think Eddie built a game over the last few years to definitely beat New Zealand. With the way he wanted the team to play, with the tight running lines, how he thought he could get over New Zealand. So I definitely think his game was built around beating them, maybe not so much beating South Africa. And I also think, too, we played a year ago, we played the All Blacks in Twickenham, and we just lost. And I always thought after that game, and the boys had a feeling that they'll get him when it counts. And I think, deep down in their mind, they knew if they got New Zealand in the World Cup that they could get him, that they had their number. But then once that game was over, I don't know if their minds switched enough to respect South Africa enough, I think.
That's interesting, Luke, because there is a sense that even though South Africa were a lot of people's pre-tournament pick, as the tournament wore on, people started to maybe waver a bit on whether they could get the job done. I know they weren't that impressive against Wales in the semi-final, but they weren't a very trendy pick before the England game.
No, they definitely weren't, and I think that was because the Welsh game was pretty tight. But look, Wales are definitely a difficult team, and I think South Africa play a very kind of pragmatic game. I think they know what their strengths are, and they really stick to that regardless. It's very rare they kind of open up. Now they can make a scoreline look fairly flattering. They have some pretty good finishers out there, but it was we talked about it last week. I got so few things wrong about last week, but I do think it was interesting to hear Ferg talk about the forward Farrell axis, which is one thing that I think does not suit England. It looked really good against the All Blacks, but I just thought the All Blacks had such an uncharacteristically bad defensive effort. They were so passive against England's big runners, and I actually thought the platform for that game, that was all one on the forwards for me. I thought the English pack were unbelievable, the way their ball handling and how they got over the gain line so consistently, and I kind of felt like that was a mistake to go back to that. As I said last week, I thought they should have dropped forward and picked Farrell at 10. And not that was like a really defining thing. I still think the game was definitely, as it always is, was one in the pack.
15 points off scrum penalties.
But I just feel like they have such defensive solidity when they have Farrell at 10. It's way more difficult defending at 12. It's really hard to explain that to someone unless they've actually played at the top level. But there is a huge difference in all the collisions that you have. And I think Farrell is a really good 10 in terms of defence, but he's not a really good 12 defender. I said that last week, and I'm on the record as saying that consistently. His best position for the team is definitely a 10. Like, you see how hard it is to get around Saracens, and he actually is really good at leading the line in there. Farrell, or forward, is an excellent player, but he's a small man. Like, it makes a big difference. You're playing against brilliant players who have all the skills, but they're big men as well, usually at international rugby. Like, Colby is, the odd man out, or Faf de Klerk, but they're brilliant athletes. They're freaky athletes as well. So, usually at international rugby, big men usually win the day because everyone's a good player. So I thought that told a little bit on the weekend, and Farrell just looked, when they didn't have any dominance, having two ball handlers in there, it didn't really pay any dividends. You need someone who can get you over the gain line in a tight game, or you need someone who can physically dominate or put in a big hit for you against, he's not like, Farrell is a tough guy, but he's not going to be pushing Delanda around. He's just not going to do that, whereas a Ben Teo, a Manu Tuilagi, or a Slade could have, impacted him physically there, whereas he couldn't, I didn't think.
That's kind of to the point Ben was making, in that maybe Eddie was tailoring a game plan towards the All Blacks, and he kind of went with the same 15, maybe not the exact same game plan, but the same 15 anyway.
Yeah. Well, I suppose in Eddie's defence, I don't know the guy at all, to be honest, but in his defence, if they play that well against New Zealand in the semi, how do you really justify changing the team?
Definitely.
Like New Zealand were the outstanding side throughout the tournament up to that point, and England weren't far behind them, but when, they blew New Zealand off the park, for the first time in probably 2 or 3 years. No team had done that to them before and made them look that poor in lots of different areas. So how could you justify you're not going to pick forward again at 10? So tough decision for Eddie Jones, but hindsight's a great thing. And in fairness to Luke, he did call that last week, but he's not going to get that free coffee off me.
Best of luck. Yeah, in fairness, I don't blame you. Like, in fairness, like we did say, like there's no way he's going to drop him after that game. But I don't know what you think, Benny, because you've played like so closely next to those guys. Myself and Ferg have only really played against them. Like, what's your take on that? Because I think if they're going forward, like, and the opposition aren't defending well or really being aggressive with them, those guys they'll tear you apart. Like, but I think if you're not doing that, it becomes really difficult to justify having those two guys there.
Yeah, I think, like you said, it depends how the game's going. And I think, the way the game was going against South Africa, obviously Eddie pulled off forward, I think, at the 50-minute mark and put on Slade, but maybe it was a little bit too late then. But, I've played with both of them, and then I've come off sometimes, and they've gone on together. And when a game's open and them two are out there together, they're very dangerous, and they can get the ball to the edge really quick. Faz can put in kicks from the 12. They're really good, but then it's got its limitations too. So depending on the game, maybe it's not going to work as well. And Eddie's probably shown that he can chop and change. And like Ferg said, it would have been a ballsy move to just drop them after the game they had against the All Blacks. But there was a few guys that maybe were emotionally wrecked after that All Blacks game, and maybe they could have been better off coming off the bench. But one thing I also think too with the England side is it's a lot different now to maybe sometimes when I was there. I think people forget that Eddie termed that the phrase the finishers. I don't think he had his old type of finishers that he used to have. Back in the day, he used to bring off the bench Jamie George.
You're talking about yourself here.
Carl Sinclair, Danny Kerr, Jack Noel. I was part of some of those.
Fuck me,
ones,
Benny. This isn't a blow your own trumpet session, mate.
Mate, I'm just saying, mate.
No, I agree. I actually do agree with you.
He
and
Sinclair
used to be on the bench as well. So did Jamie George, yourself, a few others. Who was the scrum half?
Danny Kerr, yes, exactly as you were saying, Ben. Like, I mean, it's interesting to hear you say it because, like, it does, like, in a game like that, like, I always think, forward, he always used to bring forward off the bench, really, didn't he, in most of those games? Yeah. Or, like, I know sometimes depending on the game, he would have brought you, but, like, when the game's open, I think those guys probably would have a bigger effect. Like, do you think that had an impact?
I think. Just because we're talking about it now, we can obviously say that maybe that had an impact, but I think spiritually was maybe the thing that got England more than maybe talking too much about positional or Sinclair getting knocked out, the 10 and 12 or the back three. I think it was more of a spiritual thing, but that the fact that they played so well against the All Blacks, what they did in the week, what they talked about, because I don't know if they came out the same way South Africa came out in a World Cup final.
Would you agree, Benny? We've all played in big games before, and sometimes watching is kind of easier as a player than when you're actually on the field. But when you are on the field in those situations, and it's not about the Sinclair thing at the start. The commentators are going on about it, the pundits are going on about it, but it's about like an energy and it's about like an aura that is going on in a game that you're kind of going, this is going to be very hard to turn over. And South Africa had that. Yeah. They literally just had that in the first 10 minutes. And it was one of those things that was a little bit relentless for England, and they just could not stop it.
Yeah. And I get it too, because I've lost finals. I've lost big finals. And I've been on the field when, we kind of guys are looking around to someone's got to change the tide here. And you can feel it slipping away. As hard as you try, you just can't get it back. And that's just, sometimes it's gone in the first 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. And I think that's how it was in that game.
But to be fair to England, like in the second half, there was that moment when Joe Marler came on, they won a scrum penalty. I think it was to go either 3 behind or to level the game. I can't remember. And Farrell pushed it slightly to the right of the post. Like the game still was in the melting pot. You look at the final score when Am and Mapimpi combined for that great try, and Colby put on the finishing touch and think it was a complete hammering. And in some ways it was, but there was a little moment there in the second half where the game was still for the taking, Luke. Yeah,
well, I think you're again. So we come back to this conversation. I think about the scoreline is kind of irrelevant, and I think if you look at it on balance, like more often than not, you're going to look at teams that who had moments and who had the game, who had what, when you're watching, you have a feeling about a game, or when you're playing in a game where you're just thinking, they just have way more of this game, way more of every single facet seems to be a struggle for one team versus the other. And I think that's why, bar the scoreline, we'd say South Africa looked like they had so much of the game versus England having maybe a few moments, a kick slides by, whatever it is. And yes, that can change the complexion, it can lift the team, but on balance, I think England had way less of that game than I think than South Africa had. I think they didn't help themselves in periods as well. They had some kind of key guys who were handling the ball a lot. I think Ben Youngs had I'm a big fan of Ben Youngs.
Passing was poor.
But yeah,
Everyone
he had a
was
bad
checking
day.
that.
He had a bad day, but the thing is as well, remember, the last couple of weeks, he's been on the front foot completely, so every single there's a reason people are overrunning, is because the timing the last couple of weeks, their pack were completely dominant against New Zealand. Every single time Billy Vunipola, any of the Vunipolas got the ball, Sinclair was passing it, they were awful, they were getting over the gain on every single time, so he never had to check. He could pick and nearly take a step or two. Everyone's running onto the ball, everyone looks like a good option. It was very different against South Africa because they had way less of those times. They had moments. And when he was trying to, I think, force things, or when they felt the pressure, he throws the one into touch, and a few other bad decisions. I know that's kind of the highlight one. But I thought those kind of things didn't help them. They never really managed to wrestle back the momentum.
I think England and South Africa kind of mirrored each other in each other's semis.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense. So, South Africa, it was just one of those days where everything was sticking, like Mapimpi's chip, and it pops back in and he gives it this, and they're winning everything in the air and they're winning all the scraps, whereas England did that against New Zealand, everything, from the first minute and a half, and they scored that try, unreal. But then, the likes of Anthony Watson, who've been playing so well the whole tournament, making uncharacteristic errors, along with other guys, the ball getting knocked out of their hands. It was just one of those days. And the thing about it is that, the best thing about tournaments, and whether it's a Champions Cup, whether it's a Pro 14, whether it's a Super 15 or whatever it is, or a World Cup, the highest level, you can play as well as you want for a tournament, but 80 minutes of rugby is anything can happen. Really can, in terms of guys' mentality, in terms of preparation, in terms of refereeing decisions. And it was just one of those days where I think England were the best team in the World Cup. They just didn't win it. And South Africa turned up in the final.
Yeah, Ben, just to reflect, I guess, on the last couple of years, you were obviously in the England setup with Eddie Jones, and as you mentioned, he was always talking about winning the World Cup. And it seemed like a fairly interesting experience from afar. What was it like being in that environment, with Eddie? He seemed to drive the players very, very hard.
Yeah, he's a very intense character. He drives his staff, he drives his players hard, and I don't know if there's a harder working man in sport going around, and the hours he puts in. So the guys have been driving, and some guys have been on the journey for 3 years, some only for 1 year, but the message was always the same, that the main goal was the World Cup. And that's why it's devastating for them, and I'm not sure whether he comes back or not, and what the messages will be like, but it might be quite tough to get going again for some of them. So but I see a bright future, because if you look at that side, it's a young side now with a lot of experience, and they'll take the lessons from that game and move forward.
And one thing Eddie would always talk about was how he wanted the team to be like a certain percentage fitter by the World Cup, and by all accounts, the fitness element of the trainings were very, very tough. What can you tell us about that? How hard did you guys have to train, or in terms of compared to maybe other teams or other setups you've been in?
Oh, I think I've never seen a session run as smooth and as specific as Eddie's. They're down to the seconds. He's got staff running around, changing cones all over the field. You move from one drill to the next, and there's not one thing that you do in that camp, on or off the field. If it's not going to help you be a better rugby player, it's gone. Whether that's a piece of equipment in the gym, whether that's some type of session, if he doesn't think that you're getting out what you should, then it's gone, and they'll find something else. So I think he's been very good at doing that with the boys and bringing them along. And, a year ago and that, they were calling for his head, and he should be gone. And he was saying, judge me on my World Cup. Well, they were impressive. They were impressive at the World Cup. But like Fergus said, when it comes down to it, it's one big game, and who's going to get up for that 80 minutes? And that's why sport is cruel, because sometimes the best team doesn't end up, taking the prize.
And what's your relationship like with Eddie Bennett? It must have been close enough, because obviously there was that decision point with Leinster where you were kind of thinking, will I hang on, based on a few conversations with Joe before you left. But you must have a close enough relationship to him. But, I mean, obviously it would have been disappointing to finish the way you did. So, like, what's it like now? It sounds like you kind of admire the guy still.
Oh, yeah, of course, definitely. He texts me a little while ago to say, I hope you're doing well. And I said, tell the boys I said hello and good luck. And, I think he does respect a lot of the guys that have just been on the journey with them. And it's, funny with some of these things is you get involved, and you put your heart in, but you can't, not everyone can go the full journey. Some guys got to fall off, whether it's myself, Rob Shaw, Haskell, Dylan through injury, these guys through injury falling off. So you just wish them all the best, and you gave it all you could, and then they go on. But I've got nothing but respect for Eddie and the team, and I enjoyed my time there. And like I said, he's the hardest working guy I've ever met.
Bar me, Benny, obviously, yeah.
Bar you, yeah.
since he went to the left wing.
And Ben, what was the conversation like when he did give you the bad news? Like, what was the explanation that he gave you?
Well, the explanation I probably can't go into, but when he told me,
can you just stop punching your fellow players, mate?
When he told me, when he said, he said to me, unfortunately, Benny, I can't take you to Japan. You're not on the 31. And I said to him, I understand, Eddie, that's your decision. And I said, this is what I actually said to him. I said, Eddie, mate, I hope you go and do it, because I know how much it means to you, and I'll be back here and I'll be rooting for you guys. And that's all I said to him. And he said, thanks, mate. And we finished the conversation. And I'm grateful for the opportunities that I've had and for him selecting me and being able to play Test rugby. So there was no bitterness, and I just crack on and keep it moving.
And you're in Toulon at the moment there, and I mean, like, how did that come about? I mean, like, such an exciting place. They've obviously come through a difficult couple of years, but probably a big opportunity with a lot of guys moving on, Bastareaud and that as well. So talk to us, how are you getting on over there, and how did it come about?
And a few wingers, mate. Like, I know there's a couple of guys there that maybe are shooting on, or like you could do with some experience, and maybe a few guys that have a headband or whatever.
Mate, to be honest, I finished up with England, and I had about 4 or 5 months until I went off to Japan. So I sort of it fell into place. They called me on the Tuesday. I was actually flying out of the UK. I was flying back to Australia to have a holiday. And the morning I'm at the airport, I get the text, say, Toulon want you to here, but they want you tomorrow. So I flew to Dubai, and I turned around and I flew back to Nice. And I came to Toulon, and I did 2 training sessions, and I played on the weekend. And it's just been, it's been crazy. But I think, Toulon's going through a transition themselves from the World 15 that we know and that we used to play against to now a team trying to build a future of success through an academy system and investing in facilities and all that. So it's not the old Toulon that we knew. It's a new club going through a new journey.
So are you back in the academy, Benny? Are you?
Sorry?
You're back in the academy.
Yeah, I'm back in the academy on the academy wage as well. But
and is there wine as shit as they all say? Yeah. Wine and
listen, we're delighted you came on the line, Benny. Sorry, we should be actually be trying to actually be nice to you.
Well, I was going to say, have you had any interesting interactions with Murad Boujalal? I know he's an interesting character.
No, yeah, he's around every day, but obviously he speaks French. I can't speak French, so there's not too much. There's just ça va, a handshake, and that's about it.
And sorry, Luke touched on it earlier. Like, how close were you to staying put in Ireland and maybe giving it a go, playing for the Irish national team if you became qualified?
Look, deep down, I don't think it would have ever happened. It was one of those things where, I remember Matt O'Connor signed me. I came over, I played 1 season. I went back to Australia for the off season. I got a call. Matt's been sacked. So, you know, deep down, I was going to leave as well. But then I got a call from Leo, and he sort of said, you know, mate, it's my first year. You know, I'd really love you to stay. Like, would you please stay? And, you know, Leo's a good guy, and I had a lot of respect for him. So I ended up staying for that year. But I think that year the second year was always going to be the last. And I know Joe, you know, I had a few meetings with Joe, and he wanted me to think about staying for one more year and to qualify. But I don't think it was ever really going to happen. It probably just didn't feel right. You know, I know people give me a bit of shit about playing for England, but, you know, my mother is English, so I've always had the passport. So maybe I felt a little bit more of a connection, but I think it would have been tough to stay in Ireland. And, you know, as much as I love wearing the Irish jersey and singing shoulder to shoulder with my mates.
On the beers. You and Noli, mate.
Yeah, I don't know if it would have ended up happening. So.
Yeah, it was an interesting time in Leinster, wasn't it, when Ben was over? There was a bit of upheaval, as he said.
There was, but I think Matt O'Connor was treated very poorly by the club. I mean, look, I think Matt, he's a sensitive guy, wears his heart in his sleeve, you know, and I think it just kind of all seemed to be, the tide seemed to go against him, you know. I think I actually rated him very highly as a coach. I got on really well with him. So yeah, like that was definitely a difficult period, and I think Leo definitely found it tough his first year, but they gave him the time because he was starting off, so it was kind of ideal. I think Matt, actually, he bore the fruit of a lot of Matt's good work as well as his own. He was very brave in picking a lot of young guys. He got, you know, obviously Johnny Sexton back into the setup, and Easton Asiwa back into the setup. With like those kind of things made it you know, a massive difference. Plus they got rid of Lottie Takiri as well, but they got rid of some of the deadwood, like Betty Teo as well, and Luke Fitz retiring. So they got rid of a lot of the deadwood. But no, look, on a serious note, like I think it was a difficult period, and Ben's right. It just shows you, you know, as much as you get a bit of stick for the English thing, he did stick around in a year when there was a lot of upheaval, which would have been difficult because, you know, he was close with Matt, like a lot of us were. So, yeah, like I think it was a difficult period, but it was, you know, it's funny that I think that the amount of players and the amount of good stuff that's come from that difficult period, it's amazing in just generally across life, isn't it, that it's a difficult period to really find out the most about yourself, and I think it was that period was absolutely crucial to this Leinster team now and the little period of success they're going through at the moment. So yes, look,
yeah, it was a tough time, but yeah, like I said, I only really came back for, you know, to help out
and for the scones, mate.
Yeah, but you know, at the end of the day, I obviously knew that they were looking at bringing in Robbie Henshaw and those boys. So, you know, it was a great time for me to move on and move to England and give this test rugby a crack.
Yeah, Ferg, you know, how did you find Ben as a teammate at the time?
How did you find him as a teammate? Yeah, being completely honest, the thing I love about Benny the most is with, you know, I'm sure all the listeners today can hear from him, is that there's no bullshit from the guy. And that's, you know, clear as day when you meet him as well, because there are a lot of players and coaches and different people you come across within the game where they say a lot of different stuff that they don't mean, or they try and, you know, create maybe an image of what's going on that's not, and that's not the case with Ben at all. You saw, you know, the level of respect. He's talked about Eddie Jones there. You could easily have gone through him after leaving him out of a squad that he should have been in my eyes. So that's a test to him as a guy. And, you know, when I played with him, I loved it. You know, he probably didn't hit as hard as me for a big fella, but sure. What can you do?
Yeah, but when you started off by saying, I'll be completely honest, I didn't know what way you were going to go with it.
It's funny that, like, you know, when I left Leinster, and, you know, it was a tough 2 years with Matt and Leo's first year, but, you know, you fast forward a few years and you see you guys winning the European Cups and all that kind of stuff. And it's nice to see because, you know, I remember watching the games and seeing guys like, you know, James Tracy and Luke McGrath and these type of guys. And I'm thinking, gee, I remember going to Treviso away with these guys, you know, when all the big dogs were gone. You know, I mean, we're going struggling in Treviso and Zebre and Gwent Dragons and playing with the young guys. and then, you know, they end up, look at them being test players, you know, Jack Conan and all that. So it's nice to see it.
And yeah, Ben, we really appreciate giving us a few minutes of your time. But before we let you go, just what's your kind of honest opinion on what happened to Ireland at the World Cup from someone looking in from afar?
Look, I think to be honest, maybe they looked a little bit old. Maybe I just think they probably weren't as dominant as what they had the last few years, and it is tough, going from success. But maybe the warning signs were there in that warm-up game that they played against England at Twickenham, that maybe they weren't at the same pace as the other superpowers in rugby. And I think, Joe, from looking from afar, Joe Schmidt was very, very loyal to some players, and maybe he didn't get the results back of what he thought. And, like we say, it's a ballsy move to change up your World Cup team, or what you think your team is, maybe 6 months to a year out. But, some of the most ruthless coaches out there, they do that type of stuff, Look at Eddie. He dropped off a fair few guys. He didn't care whether he had caps, whether he had experience. If he thought there was a young kid and he was hungry, i.e. Lewis Ludlam, if he thought he was a hungry kid, he's like, I'm going to take him to the World Cup. And maybe Joe was a bit too loyal to a few guys that weren't giving him what he needed. And once you're over there and you got your 31, that's what it is.
It's interesting because, whatever about Eddie Jones, he certainly lived by that principle, didn't he? There was a lot of bolters in that squad, whereas Ireland, it was a quite settled squad, for better or worse.
Yeah, he took chances. I think Steve Hansen, I thought, did the same thing. And you could probably argue that ultimately it might have backfired on them, but I think that's probably been a bit harsh. I thought it was kind of interesting. I thought in the games, the two games where it was fairly critical, I thought Steve Hansen should have had Bowden Barrett at 10 against England, and he should have had Ben Smith at 15. And I think that England probably, the chance they took against New Zealand, it really paid off. It was the perfect game, and the two guys were brilliant in that one. But then in the final against South Africa, his best team the last couple of years has been with Farrell at 10. And I just thought that was interesting. I think it was ballsy, and it was brave. And I think that probably, to be honest, I still would subscribe to that way of thinking. I think you have to have guys that are droppable. Everyone has to be droppable. You have to keep that high performance level up the whole time. No one can be beyond reproach. And I think there was probably a few guys in the Irish team, I completely agree with Benny, that Joe was really, really loyal to, and they were probably beyond reproach. And he was kind of relying on past performances to maybe reproduce it. Whereas really, you need to be consistent for a period going into it. And I think there was a few people that weren't. In saying that, Rassie Erasmus, I think was he was brave enough in a few positions. He took a lot of guys back into the fold. So yeah, I think that way of thinking is good, but you just have to be careful. That I think what really tells for me is the body of work before. I think if you look at New Zealand, they were mixing up with Mo'unga there. I think in the big games, they're still better off with having Barrett there. And I thought the same around England. So I agree with everything with what Benny said. I think it really backfired on a big stage, and he was very loyal and got it probably backfired on him pretty badly.
Yeah, any thoughts?
I don't know if I can cover anything else without probably digging a hole for a couple of the boys to actually play with. But I think that England, Eddie Jones, is a prime example of someone who did freshen it up. Even putting laws in. And I know he's an older guy, but he was playing the best rugby of his career. So he changes Cruz and Atoja playing together for Saracens, and they're winning Champions Cups, and all of a sudden he puts laws in because he was playing the best. And that kind of sets a really good kind of culture and mentality for the rest of the squad, because they're going, well, hold on here for a second. If I train as well as he's saying and play, to the best of all the guys in the same position as me, I'm going to be the guy that gets picked. And in fairness to Eddie Jones, that is what he did. And that was probably one of his shortfallings with picking forward in the final, because he was playing the best as a 10. But, looking back on it with the game that was in it, how physical it was, Farrell was probably the right man to pick. So yeah, hindsight's easy and all that, but I suppose in terms of changing people up and freshening a squad up leading into a World Cup cycle, Eddie Jones probably did it the best, but at the end of the day, they didn't win the championship.
Did you see what was interesting? I'd be interested to get your opinion on this, Benny. He was talking today, or he's already come out kind of saying that, this World Cup team is dead. Like, he's just going to start afresh with the next World Cup in mind. Because we had this conversation last week, and I was saying, like, it's an interesting one. Like how do Ireland go about this now? Like, because obviously they haven't come off at the same high, but yet no one really here is talking about making wholesale changes and thinking about the World Cup. Whereas England have come off a bit of like they actually were playing brilliant rugby, and they're already saying, well, we're changing for the next. Like, who's available for the next World Cup? Who do we think?
There's a couple of boys there going, well, fuck me, Jones. Like, I didn't drop a ball in the final. You know?
Yeah.
I think,
what do you think?
I think it's true because I believe what he's saying. What he's saying is that exact group of players. Even some of the ones that you think, he's going to be there for the next 2 years, he won't be, because what he's saying, he said, guys will lose the desire, they'll lose fitness, they'll get injured. And I think the desire one's a big one, because coming off a big tournament, he'll want to see how hard you playing at club level. You know, what's your skin folds like? What are you training like when you come into camp? Are you doing all the things he's asking? And if you're not, he's going to say, well, you don't have the desire anymore, and he's going to move you on. And he doesn't mind bringing in an 18-year-old kid or a 19-year-old kid in your position. So I think some of the guys we think are shoo-ins for the next few years are going to have a rough time with him. He'll be on their back big time.
Just a quick one. What's on the journey for you now? So you've got a few more months there in Toulon. Are you heading off to Japan? You said before you head back to Oz, I presume.
Yeah. So I'm here in Toulon till the end of January, and then I go to Japan from January to May, and then I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just a freelancer now. I just go around and. I play club footy, and I'm not too sure, but realistically, the rest of my career will be spent either in France or in Japan, just playing club footy for the next few years until I wrap it up.
All right. Well, look, Benny, thanks a million for coming on. I know it's difficult to get the time zones. You got a kid over there as well. Our best regards to Connie, and the best of luck with the rest of your career. Just want to echo what Ferg said. Really honest guy. Always great fun to be around. Brilliant player as well. So best of luck in the rest of the journey wherever rugby takes. We hopefully see you back in Ireland at some stage, Benny. Okay.
Cheers. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks for coming on, man. Bye.
So, lads, we'll just finish up, I guess, looking back to Irish rugby, the provincial action this weekend, the Interpro derbies. There's no real rest from the World Cup. We're going straight into the big games for Leinster, Connacht on Friday night, and then, Munster, Ulster on the Saturday. How important is it that, the returning internationals, however many play this weekend, come back and, looking something close to themselves with the European games around the corner? You don't really want this World Cup hangover or whatever it is to linger much longer.
No, certainly not. And I think even just from talking to the guys that have come back from the World Cup, they're dying to play, because, coming back into a new setup, a new fold after, a very disappointing World Cup campaign for what they would have wanted. It's just a new start for them, a fresh leaf, and taking off from a kind of a winning culture that they left, really, after winning the Pro 14 last year, and some of them playing really great rugby. So the guys that come back in, I'm sure they'll be just looking to get back into the same systems, the same moves, different calling systems. Lukey, going from Ireland to back into Leinster or your province is quite difficult, because you've been ingrained in those moves and all that chat around what you're doing for a certain period of time, and it's the same stuff, but it's just different wording.
Kind of upset your rhythm a little bit, can't it?
A little bit. And then when you say a few things to certain guys who've been in Leinster for a while, or else vice versa, like Leinster to Ireland guys, it can just, like, guys can get a bit frustrated being like, what are you doing? Do you know what I mean? Like, that's not what you should be saying now. And it's, to get that knocked out of all of those guys this week will be a good thing. But listen, there's like a couple of Connacht guys will be in the same boat. Jack Hardy, I'm sure, will be playing, and he'll be pivotal for Connacht. And Connacht have been a really tough obstacle for Leinster in the sports ground. They're playing great rugby under Andy Friend, and in fairness, I really respect that guy. He's a great coach, and he seems like a really good fella, according to anyone that's been coached under him.
What was it like having the internationals back in training? Was it a little strange, or was it just business as usual?
I'm probably the wrong guy to ask because I've had a bit of an elbow issue the last couple of
Very
weeks.
unlike you to miss that.
I knew he was injured. I thought he would be there. Like. Do you get the week off? Like?
Ooh, he's defensive tonight, isn't he?
No, I don't have the week off actually. But if you want to give it to me off, then call me on that. But no, I've been in training away. Just not on the field with the lads, doing the pitch sessions and stuff, in the same gym sessions and all the rest, but just doing different programs. But it's been great to see them back. You know, it's funny when you're watching guys, you know, away playing for Ireland, you want them to succeed massively, but it's kind of strange because you know them so well, and it's a different type of emotion as to watching it when you're a young fella, and it's like Keith Wood, Simon Gagan, people that you're not connected at all, so it's kind of hard to describe. So very disappointed to see them not do as well as we would have liked, but them coming back, it's like, you know, we're so tight, honestly. The best thing about the Leinster squad at the moment, from the youngest guy to the oldest guy, is it is a very tight squad. And I think you can see that by the way we play, and the way that people show up for each other week on week. So seeing those guys after not seeing them for whatever it was, 2-3 month period, was a great thing, and it's a refresher for the squad as well. And I'd like to think it'll be a real bonus going into these couple of first European games after the Connacht match.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the selections are like over the next week or two in terms of how many guys are brought straight back in, because to be fair, a lot of the internationals didn't have good World Cups, whereas I know they maybe weren't playing the strongest opposition, but you know, Leinster, Munster, Ulster and Connacht have all started the season really well, and some, you know, young guys or players who wouldn't ordinarily maybe be in the starting team have played really well. So like, do you expect the provincial coaches just to bring back the internationals en masse, or actually reward the guys who have them going well week in, week out?
I'd expect them to kind of combine it a little bit, actually. I don't think you can just make wholesale changes. I think that would really upset the balance in the squad and all the hard work that you've done. I'd be thinking that you want to reintro them to training, but I'd be kind of staggering it a little bit, depending on who you feel like is going to, you know, needs the game time, because there's going to be some of the international guys that won't have played very much at all, because obviously Joe didn't, you know, he just picked the same guys all the time. And then there's going to be some guys who probably will need a rest, so you might stagger those people in, because you want to have you want to pick it from a full complement for the first European game, and you want everyone to be on a level playing field. And playing for the international team has to count for something. You know, you're definitely, while they didn't play well, it's the biggest stage and it's the hardest place to actually play well, because you're playing against all the other best players in the world. So we have to take that into account while it didn't go well. So look, these guys are quality rugby players, but the great thing for Leinster particularly is that there's been a group, like, they have a great group there already, you know, and there's lots of guys who might be established that might not get in that team, probably won't get in that team for that first European game. So look, I think for all the provinces, it's a difficult thing to marry. You know, do you give the guys a rest or do you just get them straight back in? I'd say a lot of them will be chomping at the bit just to get back involved in provincial setups where they have been going pretty well. They've been playing really well, all four provinces. You know, the big improvements in Connacht's friend came in. I think Dan McFarlane's doing some great work up in Ulster, and they made a few good signings. So I expect all four provinces to be competing very heavily this year, and I think it'll be makes for a great weekend. I'm dying for a bit of provincial action, to be honest.
There's one big talking point that I actually should have brought up earlier when we had Ben Teo on. I regret closing over my piece of paper. The big
Saracens.
One today, Saracens, obviously.
I was surprised we didn't get it. Yeah, but look,
I was completely slipped my mind. But I don't know what your guys' thoughts are. Like, as people who, you both competed against them over the last couple of years. I know it's not really relevant to Ireland per se, but what have you made of it? Like, it's a huge story.
Difficult thing to get around, isn't it? Like, I suppose at the end of the day, it's a pretty hefty fine. You know, if you look at the averages, like, so how many have they played? 5 games so far in the Premiership? I think it's
3.
3 games.
Yeah.
Is it 3 games? Okay, so they've 24. Have they 24 games? Like, they've 21 games to get it right. That's pretty much like, what have they got? I'm not sure how many points they have at the moment. Anyway, but
they've 9 points.
Yeah, I think on average they usually have. Is it 70 points? I looked at someone did it today. 75 points or something like that. If you,
they're not going to get relegated.
They're not going to get relegated, but they've a pretty good chance. Like that, if they don't, if they got a few bad losses against some good teams in the Premiership, like, they're hovering below the average in the league. I think they won't go down.
They'll struggle to
but
get into the
there's pressure on them to hit the ground running. And lots of those guys are coming back from big World Cup campaigns, and they're not going to come back straight away either. They're going to have another week or so before they get back. So they're under pressure. What I would say is, I think it's probably the right thing. Would be my view. I think if you're breaking the rules, if you're giving yourself an unfair advantage against other teams, particularly in a league where you can get relegated, That doesn't sit well with me, and it looks like it doesn't sit well with the Chiefs in whoever's looking after the Premiership or the powers that be. And I like that they came out strong. I think if you look at the stuff for Barcelona and Man City in football, that's not right. Like you shouldn't be doing that stuff. You shouldn't be breaking those rules. Like the rules are there in place to protect someone, like all the teams in the competition, and to protect the integrity of the competition. If you're going outside that, I don't think it doesn't sit well with me. And I like that they came in strongly. Is it a bit too strong? I don't know, but I think you have to feel the pain somewhere, so you stop other teams, from doing it.
Yeah, what did you make of it? Is there an asterisk behind the trophies they've won or what they've achieved?
No, I wouldn't think that. I think that it's bizarre to think that they could get that much of a fine and that much of a points deduction. Like it's an awful lot.
Yeah,
I would have thought it would be like a larger amount of one or a larger amount of the other.
But they're both.
You can't really go any further than 35 points, can you? Because there's no point in really
you may as well not play the league.
In saying that, Saracens are that strong that they could still make the Champions Cup, but they're not going to win the league now. And like they would have been favourites to do so. It's going to have implications because at the end of the day, there's a few of those guys coming back. Their confidence was riding high leading that World Cup final. Things didn't go right. They get hit with this news as well. Bit of unrest in the camp. You just don't know what's like. That's not great going into like the first 2 weeks of Europe. So, not ideal for Mark McCall, who's done a fantastic job over there. And as Luke said, they bent the rules, so they need to be sanctioned. But it's not my place to say what should or should not happen. So.
Difficult to figure out what's appropriate for it. I think it seems pretty heavy-handed to me, but part of me thinks that that's probably the right way to go about it. I would say, in terms of an asterisk next to their performances over the last couple of years,
not their performances, but the trophies.
But the performances are linked to the trophies. So I think the two are inextricably linked. So there's no way you can just you can't have one without the other.
But if you can't win the trophies without the squad,
but sorry, if you let me get to it, I'm going to get to it. Right, I just think that what he's built. There's like Toulon, there's lots of other teams who have massive budgets as well, and they haven't even come close to reproducing the kind of performances and consistency that group has come with, even with the same amount of star-studded players, in my opinion. So I wouldn't take anything away from that. Will just to answer the question on it. I don't mean to be combative on it, but I think we can't take anything away from that. However, it will have fairly broad implications for, because I assume that the fine probably has to cover a period where they're going to keep these players, because you can't just, the contracts don't just end. You can't just disrupt people's lives who've moved families, etc., over to these new places or over to Saracens to play their rugby. You can't just rip up the contracts and start again under the salary cap. So I presume there's going to be a period where this is going to, it probably won't have an impact on the squad, but it'll certainly have an impact on them post whatever it is, maybe 2 years or maybe 3 years. They're going to have to, some guys are going to have to go because they're breaking the salary cap rule.
I think the funniest thing is that you wouldn't looking at their team on paper last year, their best 23, you wouldn't have necessarily thought this. Like they've got incredible players, some of the best and strongest, best leaders and best players from the English side, throughout the spine of the English side and the Saracen side. Fine, they got Skelton, they got Maitland, a few others, but not guys that you'd think Toulon-esque, where you've got
Sevilla and
Sevilla, these guys going over performing. So
yeah.
They actually have a culture there where they've been building up younger guys coming through. They seem to have a very good culture in Saracens. I think that's been a big thing about them being successful, and that's probably been the biggest shock to me hearing this news.
Yeah.
Because
a lot of them are from their academy.
And they're obviously
a few guys like Liam Williams would have been a big. That's a hefty outlay. You'd have to take
Elliot
Ashton
Daly
would have been at the time. Elliot Daly, I think people were like that was pretty disheartening for the rest of the league when someone like Elliot Daly went to them when they were in they're completely in their pomp as well. So those kind of things, I think that they are difficult for.
Maybe the cock as well, the prop.
Yeah, he was unbelievable. So
Brits could have been on quite a lot. That's obviously just on a lot more money than we thought they were. But I mean, they've just paid the price, and
I mean,
tough for them to take now. And let's as well. They are going to appeal this as well. It might not be as heavy-handed, post some kind of appeal. But I just don't know where they benchmark that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, where do you go from that?
Because they're 16-1 to win the Premiership now. So if you have like a legal mind that's kind of telling you they might get off, back them at 16-1, because if they do get off, they'll go back down to evens, and then you.
But they can't get. I don't think they're going to get off.
They're not going to get off.
I don't think so. I know they were talking about.
That's like someone going, Will, you've got a life sentence for X, but we're going to actually completely leave you off now.
Or even if they cut it to like 15
they are disputing.
points.
Sorry, they are disputing the way that the funds, the way that they are distributing the funds to players. It's some kind of loophole. Whereby I think that they are it's like a joint partnership.
It's business arrangements.
It's like an investment.
Yeah.
So that technically they're saying that this has never been an issue in the league before. That lots of different clubs do it, but all of a sudden now this is a massive problem because they've delved a bit deeper into it, which I think is probably right. But look, is it for us to say? Like, let's wait maybe a little bit further before we see the outcome of it.
It's at the moment it's a headline, and this is what they're being accused of, and we've seen it all before, and it could be a lot less than it is, or it could be more. Who knows? But we'll see. Yeah.
Well, just before we wrap up, I've been told, Ferg, this is your final left wing with us. It's been a memorable, eventful 8 weeks.
Sad to see you laughing.
Have
you enjoyed dipping your toe into the media along with myself and Luke?
No, I certainly have. It's been very enjoyable actually, and it's been a bit of crack as well. A little bit disappointed that it wasn't called the left and right wing after maybe the first 4 or 5 weeks. I'm sure it was going to take a bit of a transformation period for that, but thanks for having me on. It's been thoroughly enjoyable, and who knows, maybe I'll be on again.
Yeah, well, best of luck for the rest of the season. Anyway, hope the elbow injury, which I knew about, I didn't appreciate that comment, heals up nicely, and you're featuring some big games over the course of the season. Thanks so much for coming in over the last few weeks. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Will Ferg.
And that is all we have time for this week on the Left Wing in association with Aldi. We will be back next week to preview the Champions Cup. It is that time of year again, and in the meantime, you can subscribe to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, or listen on independent.ie. So until next week, thank you for listening, and goodbye.
The Left Wing Podcast in association with Aldi. Spend €30 in store for a chance to win €50,000 for your primary school.